my father had a gorgeous voice. He really was he was one of the lead singers. He had the family. There were 5 brothers, and they had a 5-man quartet, if you will, not a quintet, but a 5-man quartet. and because always one or the other was not around, so they had this quartet, and they sang in churches, and my dad had some knowledge of he had studied classical music, and he played wind instruments, and so he'd done some of that in bands and so forth, and he conducted the choir, and so he was a good choir director and a very good musician, but he was impatient with me because I wanted to play jazz, and I wanted to play like one of his younger brothers, and he was the oldest, and my Uncle Bob. Actually, my Uncle Clint and Uncle Bob both played jazz. I didn't know Uncle Clint as well. He was an artist. He became the head of the art department at A&T, and he was very good. He had studied art, and he was very good at it. When he was young, he played stride piano, and I didn't know what stride piano was, but I know I liked what he did. And the brother just below him, who was in terms of age, my Uncle Bob, was the one I emulated. Uncle Bob was hip. I mean, he played this great piano, and it sounded unlike anybody in the family. Everybody else played Mozart and Beethoven and all of these things that were good for you and all that stuff. And I said, and so Uncle Bob sat down, and I said, "Oh yeah," So I said, "Listen, can't you teach me how to do that?" He said, "Well, I taught myself. You have to teach yourself." So he gave me my first Art Tatum record, and that was way too heavy for me at that time. So I had to start with Fats Waller, with something that was more accessible, and but it gave me a good feeling for what I wanted to do, because Waller was a hailed fellow, well met, and he was just always ready to play great jazz piano, and despite the comedy and all the stuff that he did, he was just a wonderful pianist, and so it was a good place to start.
Did you have a real sense of the full the diversity of the jazz tradition at that point, or was it
No.
more individual artist kind of thing? Art Tatum, here's a record, Fats Waller, here's.
Well, I had no concept along those lines as what was good, but jazz was the popular music when I was a young kid. I mean, you turned on the radio, you heard jazz. My dad's office was just a block away from the Howard Theater, and so I got to go to the Howard Theater. One of our neighbors was a manager of the Howard Theater, so I could get. I didn't get free, but I mean, there's someone to make sure I didn't get into mischief if I. so those we had all of those things in the neighborhood, and I got to hear all the great bands: Duke Ellington, Jimmy Lunsford. All of the great bands came to the Howard Theater. So I didn't have any idea of the progression of what was happening in music, but I did have a feeling that this was something above the average in terms of what I was hearing on the radio or what I was seeing in the movies.
Where were you getting your formal musical training? Was it in school? Were you taking private lessons? How did you learn how to play the piano in the first place?
Well, I told my dad I wanted to have piano lessons. He sent me to a very fine teacher who taught my brother and me. And I was very impatient, because by this time I was really infatuated with jazz. So I didn't want to, I heard classical music all the time. I knew what that was. I wasn't interested. I wanted to play jazz. and I thought that there had to be some shortcut so that I could get closer to what Art Tatum and these other people that I knew about were doing, and there wasn't. I mean, I fooled around with with the guitar, with saxophone, and several instruments, and I finally came back to. So this took a couple of years. I mean, because I learned to play scales and arpeggios and simple songs, and I began to fool around on my own at the piano, and I fooled around with these other instruments. And my father didn't pressure me as long as I was, not doing anything really extraordinarily bad. He said, well, just he'll find his own level of what he wants to do. I hope he likes classical music somewhere along the line. He'll learn something about it. But there were a lot of models, and we had a lot of people. We lived a few blocks from Howard University, so the people who taught there were people who were either neighbors or went to the same church, or they were. There was a small community, so I knew all of those people, and that was very important in my development. And it gave me a more balanced idea of what good music was, no matter what the style was.
I understand that you had your first professional gig at the age of 13, and you earned $1.
Yep.
What was this?
Big money.
What was this?
Well, it was on U Street. It was a nightclub on U Street, and an older player had a gig that he couldn't fulfill. I mean, he was doing something else, and so he knew I played the piano, and he was desperate. He said, can you fill in for me? I said, fine. And I was happy. I mean, I was underage. Everything was wrong, but I played a gig.